Welcome to our second lecture in the lecture series sponsored by the Container Store. They are sponsoring all four of our lectures, and we're delighted that you're here tonight. Is there someone here from the Container Store? We want to say thank you. Okay, we're going to say, yeah, there you are. So thank you. We've got a really interesting subject tonight. My name is Joel Robuck, and Linda, my wife, and I are on the advisory board. We're delighted to welcome y'all here tonight. The subject of related to eating and sleeping is something that we're all interested in. Driving over here tonight, Linda said, what we really need is a lecture on snoring and sleeping for you. So maybe we get that set up for next year. You may be wondering why we have Tuesday night lectures here at the Center for Brain Health. There is a brain revolution going on, and there is so much that's happening that what we're trying to do is increase the awareness about what's happening with brain health and all the new protocols and research that's being developed and discovered, being led by the Center for Brain Health and Dr. Sandy Chapman right here in Dallas. So we're delighted to support this effort, and we have attended and supported almost all of the lecture series over the years, and we're delighted that we can support this one. I'm going to introduce Dr. Sandy Chapman, but before I do that, I want to close with a quote from Albert Einstein. The only person who is educated is the one who has learned how to learn and change. And that's basically what we're talking about when we're talking about brain health, brain performance, enhancing our brain performance. We're learning new protocols that we can apply to ourselves, whatever stage or age we are, and enhance our brain performance. So would you please welcome Dr. Sandy Chapman.
You can see why we love to kick this off with Joel. He commands attention. I'm like, I want a voice like that. So amazing. We're so honored to have you here tonight. And thank you to the Container Store, and thank you to Joel and Linda for sponsoring this lecture. I guarantee you, not a single person in this room is going to doze off tonight, even though it's about sleep. I was telling someone, I've learned a lot about sleep over the 30 years of my career, but man, I learned a lot more today, just with a few minutes, so I know that you will be stretched in ways that you didn't even think about. I wanted to, just before I introduce Dr. Panda, last week we introduced you to the BrainHealth Project, and we had one of the most exciting turnouts. 25% of the participants that were here tonight signed up. Usually you get 2%. 25%. Guess what? Most of them were women. Men, come on. Come on. And now what we want is for you to help us get enrollment of 20 to 50-year-olds. Most people were 50 and older. So I want you to think about your kids, your cousins, your friends, and get people 20 to 50. Come on, guys. Come on. Don't forget to sign up. What we're doing with the Brain Health Project, I hope you will learn about it next week, a lot more. We are going to do for the heart, for the brain, what has been done for the heart, which is doubling brain health, because we've doubled heart health. So stand back if you want your brain strengthened, then this is the place to be. We're going to use 21st century knowledge and 21st century testing and protocols, as Joel mentioned. Now, Dr. Satchin Panda. He's a professor at the Salk Institute in California. He's author of, I know you all bought your copy, do not leave until you buy this. This is the Bible. You should read the reviews. I didn't know I could sleep so well after reading, not during reading, but after reading. It changed my life for the better. You know, he comes from Odisha in India, which is famous for peace-loving people and communal harmony. Wow, don't we need more of that today? And what does sleep do? And then he told me what his name means, and I'm not going to pronounce his name. He'll have to do that for you. It means, his first name is much longer than Satchin. It means truth, eternal happiness. Eternal happiness right here in this one amazing scientist. I think this man is a genius. Everything that we have begun to learn about sleep in the last 2 years came from his lab. What do you know about blue light and the effects on sleep? Dr. Panda. It all came from his lab that originated. What are you learning about intermittent fasting? Dr. Panda. Long before we heard, he doesn't use the word fasting because I don't like fasting, do you? Why would they use that word? When you see what his lab is, we met someone from his lab that moved here from the Salk Institute, and they said it was such an amazing place to overlook the ocean, but the thing I miss the most is Satchin Panda. You're in for a big treat tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Panda.
Thank you, Center for BrainHealth. Thank you, the Container Store. I'm really happy to be here. So when you think about lifespan or health span, let's think about what used to happen in the year 1900. In that year, when a baby was born in this country, then he or she was supposed to live only to the age of 47 years of age. Because 1 in 3 babies died before the age of 5, and most people, out of the top 10 causes of death, 8 of them were infectious disease. So that led scientists to figure out that the diseases are caused by pathogens or bugs, and that led to antibiotics, vaccination, and sanitation. So now, if we think of this year, 2020, if a baby is born in this country, then he or she is supposed to live up to the age of almost 80. Just imagine, every single year of biomedical research over the last 1 century has added 3 months to human longevity in this country. I think that's the best investment, return on investment humans have done. And that's entirely, the credit mostly goes to philanthropists and government agencies supporting science. So this is one big reason that you can have the best return on investment if you invest in science. But what is really troubling now is out of those 80 years, we spent almost 40 years fighting disease. In fact, at the age of retirement or at the age of 65, nearly 85% of adults have 2 or more chronic disease. And almost 1/3 of the adults above the age of 21 have 1 or more chronic diseases. The problem is, we know that these are not caused by pathogens, not by infections. So we cannot treat diabetes, hypertension by giving antibiotics or having a vaccine. But at the same time, we know that these cures are rare. So then the question is, what is lifestyle? If we can figure out what is lifestyle, then we can fix it. Problem is, when we say lifestyle, even scientists get confused because there are so many terms to describe lifestyle, starting from like taking 10,000 steps to whether people diet or which diet you're on. So how do we simplify what is lifestyle so that we can tackle it head on? So the way I define, or we define lifestyle is very simple. Lifestyle is what, when, and how much we eat, sleep, and move or exercise on a daily basis. It's not what we do for a week or 2 to lose 100 pounds. It's what we do every single day. So you are familiar with what and how much we eat, or what kind of exercise or sleep we have. But what about timing? So I think the best way to relate our daily habits to timing is to think about babies. Because most of you who have had babies, you know that when babies are born, they sleep for 2 to 3 hours and then they wake up and cry because they're hungry. And then you give them food, they'll go back to sleep. So just imagine if we just stayed like babies, then half of you would be crying and then the other half would be hungry. But then the good thing is, if you're lucky enough, then your baby gets full night's sleep, and then you have whole day of babies playing. So that's the best example of circadian rhythm, or this daily rhythms where we expect, and that makes life much easier if we have these daily rhythms in sleep and activity. So now what I'll do is I'll give you 10 takeaway messages. So number one is, what is circadian rhythm and why this is important? So just like babies, those of you who were lucky enough to go to bed around 10 o'clock last night, and you were in your deep sleep around 2 o'clock in the morning. But because we have this circadian rhythm or clock, we anticipate waking up. So almost 1 or 2 hours before waking up, our body begins to warm up. And then as we open our eyes and then get some light, our night or sleep hormone melatonin begins to drop, and then our stress hormone cortisol begins to rise. So that's the time, what I call the changing of the guards between day hormones and night hormones. And right after that, bowel movement most likely happens, and this is when pancreas is most active, so we can digest much better food, particularly carbohydrates. And the first half of the day is the best time for alertness, high alertness. So if you doze off, it's okay because it's in your rhythms. And then in the late afternoon, that's when we have the best flexibility, best joint function, best muscle function. So that's the best time to train for Olympics. But if you're not training for Olympics, even recently what has been shown is people with diabetes, if they do intense exercise in late afternoon, early evening, and they're more likely to control their blood glucose much better than those in the morning. But that doesn't mean that you should not exercise if the only time to exercise is in the morning. And in the evening, just around this time, 2 to 3 hours before we usually go to bed, our sleep hormone begins to rise and our stress hormone again begins to go down. So that's another time when changing of the guards happen for hormones. So if we think about it, almost every single thing on this map is an indicator of health. So that means when our rhythms are much better, when we get our morning bowel movement, our morning insulin peak, and all this stuff, then we're actually healthy. So having a good circadian rhythm is the ultimate indicator of health and vitality. So now the question is, how are the circadian rhythms generated? What controls them? So over the last 20-25 years of research, what we have learned is circadian rhythms are controlled by what we call circadian clocks. The word circadian literally means approximately 24 hours. And the reason why we have this 24 hours clock is for the last few billion years, all the life forms on this planet have to adapt to this 24-hour cycle. They have to anticipate when night is going to fall and when day is going to start. So that's why almost every life form on this planet has this 24 hours clock. And these are so important that if we take some humans from this planet and put them in another planet that has a 23 hours day-night cycle, then we may not survive for too long. So now let's think, how are these clocks organized? So just like I said, like if we have a clock in the brain, that makes our brain to go to sleep and wake up. So just like our brain has a clock, almost every organ in our body has its own clock. Even down to every single cell, even our hair follicle has its own clock. So our hair actually grows much better at a certain time and not at the other time. And the function of the brain clock is to act as a master conductor. So when the brain clock is much better, it orchestrates the symphony in physiology, metabolism, behavior. And even our gut microbiome has its own rhythm. So that means every evening we go to bed with a set of gut microbes and we wake up with a different set of bugs in our body. And another take-home message is, just like our brain needs to sleep, has to have some downtime to repair, reset, and rejuvenate, almost every organ in our body also needs that downtime to repair, reset, and rejuvenate. So now, let's see, what do these clocks do in different organs? And in fact, over the last 20-25 years, many labs all over the world have come to the same conclusion. That is, almost every brain chemical, so neurotransmitter, every hormone, every digestive juice and even every single gene in our genome has certain time when they rise up and another time when they go down. And we did a very simple experiment. This is the only experiment data I will show you. That is, few years ago, this is an experiment we cannot do in humans. We cannot take muscle biopsy, liver biopsy, or brain biopsy in every 2 hours over 24 hours. So this is one of the clear examples where one animal research has huge impact. So what we did, we collected brain tissues and different tissues that in every 2 hours or 24 hours from 64 different organs. And then we wanted to know what time genes turn on and turn off. What you are seeing is in every single circle here represents one organ, and this color bar says how many genes turn on and off. The bottom line is almost every organ that we looked at had its own clock. And in every organ, somewhere between a few hundred to a few thousand genes turn on and off at different times. And if we combine it, what we found is around late afternoon, nearly 11 to 12,000 genes turn on and reach their peak level, and in the evening they all go down to sleep. So just like we go to sleep, our genome, almost all of our genes also go to sleep, so that in the middle of the night, there are very few genes that are actually awake. So that means that in modern life, as we stay awake late into the night, we eat food late into the night, and we have light exposure late into the night, we may be disturbing how the genes go to sleep in a very simple way. So now the question is how this system works. And the best way to say that is when we flip the light switch in the middle of the night, we are also flipping the switch to turn on or off various hormones. So for example, in the middle of the night when you get up and switch on that bright light and try to read something because you cannot sleep, you are actually reducing your melatonin level, and that will keep you jazzed up for a few more hours. But a few years ago, we had no idea how the circadian system actually adjusts, because between summer and winter, we have different bit of time, and when we fly from say, Dallas to DC and come back, our body has to reset. So almost 16 to 18 years ago, actually 18 years ago, we made a big discovery, that is, and the reason is there are many blind people who cannot see, but when they travel to new time zone, they can reset their clock. So that's why it was a big mystery for almost 75 years, what actually resets our clock. And what we found is light that goes through our eye through a special light sensor resets our clock. And these light sensors are very few in numbers. In each eye, we have only 5,000 of them. So total maybe we have 10,000 of them. And these are blue light sensitive, and these are actually the real neurons that sense blue light in the retina. This is a picture from the retina. And what we found is these light sensors, or these light sensing neurons, are less sensitive to orange light. So that means when our ancestors had access to only firelight or candlelight at night, then that firelight did not activate this blue light sensor called melanopsin, so that the clock was running perfect. The melatonin level began to rise in the evening, and the circadian rhythms were robust, and people went to sleep. And during daytime, when our ancestors walked out, then this light sensor needs a lot of bright light. So this activated this melanopsin, the circadian rhythms are more aligned, and there was less depression, raises alertness, and in that way people remain healthy. But what has changed? Actually, right now, we spend most of our time in indoor environment. And during night time, we also have access to a lot of bright screens, bright light. And in fact, if you just walk into a grocery store, there is 1,000 times more light than what is in a candlelight. And that disrupts circadian rhythm, that disrupts our melatonin level, and we stay jazzed up. We cannot go to sleep easily. And even if we go to sleep, we wake up too many times. And during daytime, as the other thing is happening, because we are mostly stuck in dimly lit room throughout the day. For example, imagine all your high school students and college students throughout the day, they sit in dark room like this, and they look at PowerPoint presentation. And that reduces alertness on top of that, and what I call the sleepless night and not having enough light during daytime, we flip back and forth between insomnia and foggy brain. And if it continues for a few weeks, months, or even years, then we get closer to many of these brain diseases. The risk for many of the brain diseases might be going up because we don't have what I call healthy lighting. In that way, now there is a new lighting revolution to improve health. And in fact, just recently, in the last few years, there has been new circadian lighting in the International Space Station to improve the performance of astronauts and to make them sleep better. So just imagine, if we have better circadian lighting in schools, then the kids will learn better. If we have better lighting in old age homes or in hospitals, then we may be recovering much better. And in office buildings. So there is a scope for really redesigning our indoor environment with better lighting. So a few years ago, The Economist has this companion journal called The Intelligent Light. They came up with the term, the light therapeutics, because literally every time you flick a light switch, we are turning on or off various hormones. So in that way, how can we optimize lighting to take care of some of the psychiatric and neuronal disease? So then the question becomes, how much light is good for you? This is a debatable thing because everybody wants to be special, and we also know that everybody has slight differences in their genetic makeup. But the rule of thumb is 10,000 lux of light is enough to treat depression. What is 10,000 lux of light? Today in Dallas, in a cloudy day, if you went outside, that was 10,000 lux of light. In a sunny day in Dallas, in the middle of the day, you'll have 200,000 lux of light. So that means just stepping outside in a sunny day, even with sunglasses, gives you enough light. And just stepping outside for 30 minutes in a cloudy day like this will give you enough light. But an average person may need almost 500 lux to 1,000 lux of light. So that's what most lighting architects are striving for, to give you somewhere between 500 lux to 1,000 lux of light during daytime in office buildings. And at the same time, we should also remember that 2 to 3 hours before going to bed, we should dim down a light to 20 lux or later. So for example, those of you who are sitting in the middle, that's around 10 to 20 lux of light at night. So you can have that kind of lighting plus cast lighting for kids to read, but don't light up the entire house with 1,000 lux of light at night. And we're working with National Institute of Environmental Health and Safety to figure out, to come up with exposure guidelines. Recently we worked with UL to come up with some interim guidelines, and these are some of the stuff that we do. Then we also developed a very simple app called My Lux Recorder, which is a very simple light meter so that people can just walk around, and this is how the app looks like, very simple. It unfortunately runs only on iOS or Apple phone. And you can take a reading, and it actually saves that information. For example, I was flying to Frankfurt Airport a couple of years ago, and that was a light level. This is CPK, California Pizza Kitchen, that's where sometimes I go. And then my high school, my kid goes to high school, and this was the light level 300 lux in the evening. So I kind of play with this to figure out how much light is in different places. That's all about light, but at the same time, a few years ago, we made a discovery that all the light resets our brain clock. When it comes to food, actually food can take over. So that's why I say, just like having a healthy food on a dirty plate can make it unhealthy, similarly, having the healthy food in the middle of the night is junk. The timing can make healthy food junk. The simple way to describe that is, if we eat later in the night, then all of our peripheral clocks or organ clocks, they try to listen to the food cue, but at the same time, brain is telling, no, I'm the master, so there is a conflict between how this should be regulated, so that can lead to many diseases. Then the question is, you might think that, well, I'm not a shift worker, I'm not a police officer, I'm not an astronaut, or I'm not a pilot, so I should not care about this. But I would argue that we are all astronauts or we are all shift workers. So, for example, if we think about our ancestors, before electrical lighting, they had access to bright light, daylight, because they were outdoor. And in the evening, there was only a little bit of light from candlelight, and most of the night was dark, so they got 7 to 8 hours of restful sleep. And there was a lot of physical activity. Food was sparse, so they would get up and go look for food, and then maximum they would have 2 or 3 meals throughout the day. So this was lifestyle. And now after industrialism, this is how modern rhythm looks like, because we're stuck in dimly lit room throughout day and night. We have very little sleep, and our physical activity has gone down, and we have opportunity to eat. And in fact, nutritionists have been telling us that we have to eat in every 2 to 3 hours. So as a result, as long as our eyes are open, our mouth is open. So you might think that I just made it up. So actually we work with Horacio de Iglesia from Seattle, and we have been collecting this activity and light information from Argentinian towers who have no access to electrical lighting. And we put this watch that I'm wearing so that every time the watch senses light, then we can figure this out. So this Argentinian toba, he gets the first ray of light around right after sunrise, so that's the sunrise sunset. And then this is a little bit brighter light, this is 500 lux, that's a pretty good bright light. And this person goes to bed around 10 o'clock at night, between 9 and 10. And the width of the band is how much variation is from day to day. And you can see very little variation, goes to bed almost within 15 minutes, day-to-day variation. Now, if we redo the experiment in Seattle high school student, and I guess we can get the same result from Dallas, you can see this student goes to bed around midnight and wakes up right before has to leave for school. And we know that happens, and this is another student. And now you come to college where actually the classes can start at different time. This person goes to bed after almost 2 o'clock. So this is the extent of disruption that we see among just high school students and college students. Part of it is biological, because in teenage time, our biological clock or circadian rhythm shifts slightly so that we are likely to go to bed more later, and we are also likely to wake up later. So this is what is ingrained in our DNA. So that means maybe we should not have our high school start at 7 o'clock in the morning. So again, with Horacio de Iglesia, we did the study that came out 2 years ago, where Seattle School District changed this high school start time from 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. And then we studied student performance and sleep before and after the school start time change. And what we found is, on an average, we monitored 200 students in 2 different schools, very different socioeconomic and demographic background. What we found is, by just delaying 1 hour the school start time, we increased sleep among high school students by 34 minutes. This is very significant because for the last 50 years, US high school students have been losing somewhere between 10 to 30 seconds of sleep every single year. By just changing the school start time, we could reset the clock to almost what the students used to sleep in 1950s or 60s. And this is equivalent to 54,000 Seattle high school students taking a sleeping pill every single day of the entire year, just by changing one policy. Then you'd wonder, well, when they're sleeping, they may not be doing homework, so their grades might have gone down. But actually what we found is they had a 4.5% increase in performance of grade, and the tardiness also went down. So there are now studies like this that will help to go from personal health to population health or public policy to respect what is coming out of circadian rhythm science. So then the question is, well, if we live with broken clocks, then what happens? Well, if we're just staying awake for 2 or 3 nights to finish an assignment or to take care of a loved one, that's not going to actually put us into disease category. These are just discomfort. For example, starting from irritability, mood swing to insufficient sleep, fragmented sleep, that happens from babies and children to older adults. But if it continues for many, many days, then we get closer to many of the chronic diseases that are listed here. So for example, if I stay awake, or if I have only 4 hours of sleep, 5 hours of sleep for 5 consecutive nights, then I would be diagnosed with pre-diabetes. This has been reproduced in many different cases. So, if we, so this slide is based on epidemiological data from last 30 years, and what we find is risk for many of the diseases go up. The ones that are written in red affect more than 10% of the adult population. The ones that are written in yellow affect 5% of the population. So just imagine if we can fix the clock by developing better habits, then we can take care of a lot of different diseases. And the second aspect is clocking the drugs. Nearly 60% of FDA-approved drugs are more likely to work if given at one time than the other time. And this is now an expanding field of study. So for example, blood pressure medication taken at bedtime work much better than taken in the morning. So there is a large study on 19,000 people that just came out. So similarly, we expect that in the future years we'll find certain cancer drugs, certain drugs for arthritis, or certain drugs for even diabetes might work much better if given at the right time. So that's another line of research. And finally, there is also effort to make new drugs that will just reset our clock, and those drugs may be most effective against cancer and dementia. And some of those are already tested in animals now. So that brings us to this topic, what we used to call time-restricted eating. As Sandy mentioned, I don't use the word fasting, because fasting means reducing calorie, and this does not, the initial experiments were not reducing calorie. So I'll give you some background how our body actually uses what we eat. So for example, in the morning, as soon as we have our first breakfast, when I say breakfast, that's really breaking a fast. So it's not the morning meal that we eat right after we wake up. It's eating something after, say, 12 hours or 14 hours of fasting. As we eat, the carbohydrate from our food is used as fuel, and at the same time the body saves some carbohydrate and some fat for later use. And throughout the day, as we eat our lunch and dinner, this continues. And after the last bite, and slowly our body depletes our carbohydrate. I kind of exaggerated, it's not the same way. And then after 6 to 7 hours, it begins to tap into all the fat that we have stored. So our fat burning actually goes up slightly during nighttime until next morning. So what is important to notice is it takes almost 6 to 7 hours or even longer after the last bite to begin to burn a little bit of fat. But as soon as we eat, within 15 to 20 minutes, our body switches back and goes to burning only fat. And then, just imagine if we take the same 3 meals and expand it over a long period of time, then we won't have enough time to burn fat. And in fact, when we burn fat, that's the time we also repair many of the organs. So for example, a stomach lining has to repair itself every night. It's almost like a highway getting damaged, so we have to repair every night. In fact, 8 to 10% of our stomach lining cells get damaged. And those damage, you cannot repair a highway when the traffic is still there. So similarly, we cannot repair our stomach lining and many organs when we have food in the system. So that's why when our sleep aligns with this fasting, then we may repair our body much better, we may burn our fuel much better. So that led to the idea that maybe in mice and maybe in humans, if we eat only for 8 to 10 hours or 12 hours, we may have much better cycle, and some of these cycles will affect the brain rhythm, versus if we eat for 15 hours. So to test this idea, a few years ago, actually almost 8 years ago, we published this study. We took 2 identical sets of mice, born to the same mom in the same room, they ate the same food, they had the same gene, they ate the same food even, and they had the same number of calories every single day. The only difference was these mice were allowed to eat whenever they wanted. So they could eat in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day. And these mice were trained to eat the same number of calories only within an interval of 8 hours first, and then we have expanded to 12 hours. Although these 2 groups had the same number of calories and same food, these mice were obese and they had many other diseases, whereas the second group of mice were surprisingly completely protected from all this disease. In fact, for the first 3 to 4 years after we published, nobody believed us. They thought that this happens only in mice, we must have done something wrong, and we had to redo the experiment. So we didn't get funded for a few years, and philanthropists like you actually helped us to go through. And what was interesting was, if we now take these diseased mice, this was the most important experiment, and we put them to 8 to 10 hours of eating, even for 5 days. And in some experiments, we give the mice the weekends off. They could actually go and party, they could go meet their cousins and in-laws. And even with that, we could reverse many of the diseases. So that was the key, really eye-opening experiment that we did almost 8 years ago. And then subsequently, what we found immediately within the next 3 to 4 years, studies in other labs came to the same conclusion that by time-restricted feeding in animals or eating in humans, we can prevent many of these diseases that are listed. And what was also interesting and surprising to us was, although we are not trying to make them sleep, these animals slept much better. And when I say slept much better, they could not wake up when they are disturbed slightly. And that I call arousal threshold. The best example is the mom and the baby sleeping in the same bed. The baby may be kicking, but will sleep through the night, and the mom will wake up. And that's what happens is, as we get older, we can wake up from our sleep with slight disturbances. And when mice are fed 8 to 10 hours, and now we are finding in humans, when we eat for 10 hours, then our arousal threshold goes up, so we don't wake up from our sleep that frequently. So now we have a lot of results in mice, and how do we go from mice to human? So the first thing we wanted to know is, when do people eat? Most people in this room, and even I was thinking that I eat all of my meal within 10 to 12 hours. So to test this, we came up with a simple app called My Circadian Clock, and anyone, anywhere in the world can actually consent and download this app. It's a very simple app. What we ask people to do is take a picture of their food. So you open the app, one click, take a picture, second click, and press save, third click. It's almost like shopping from Amazon. And then, when the picture comes to our server, we line them up on what we call pedogram. So it is a timeline of whether you ate something calories. So all these blue marks here represent some calories. So for example, those of you who left home, you might have had a snack, then you came here, had another snack and a drink, and then maybe after the end of the lecture, again, you'll go have another snack. So 3 or 4 caloric events. So this is data from one person. We monitor them for 3 weeks, and you might think, okay, so there is no pattern to this. If we combine this, then those are the weekdays, and this is the weekend. And it makes sense because a lot of us eat late in the weekend. And when we eat late, that also resets our clock, so it confuses our body. So if we combine all of these and then line them up around the clock, so that is 6 a.m., this is 6 p.m., and this is midday, that's midnight. This is how the data looks like from one person. You might think that's an outlier. But actually we had 156 people, now we have reproduced this on 100,000 people, and the message is very similar. So if we see when people actually eat, yes, people eat around noon, and then dinner is around 7 or 8. But we have all the pictures. We can go back and kind of guesstimate how much calories they ate. And if we think about the calories per picture, actually the midnight snacks are loaded with calories, so they're more likely to reset your clock much better. So we've defined that within a week, what is the time window when you're likely to eat? It's not that every day you eat within that window. So what we find is 50% of adults eat for 15 hours or longer. And this is only for people who are not doing shift work. And people who do shift work, like say, nurses and firefighters, they actually have much worse. So then the question is, with all of these, how can we combine all of this into a simple lifestyle that we can say, how should your ideal circadian day look like? So what we do, we have many very controlled clinical studies. We ask very simple things, 5 or 6 different things. One is, forget about the actual timing, because we don't ask them to actually go to bed at a certain time or not. We ask people to be in bed for 8 hours so that you can hopefully catch 7 hours of sleep. And then after waking up, as I said, there is this changing of the guards for the hormones. You don't want to eat during that time. So try to avoid food for at least 1 hour after waking up. And if 2 or 3, that's okay. We haven't seen any bad effect. After the first calorie, count 8, 10, 11, or maximum 12 hours, but no longer than 12 hours to eat all your food. But make sure that your last calorie happens 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, and also there is dim light before 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. Now, during daytime, don't forget to step outside and walk 30 minutes, because that's the best antidepressant. And it's plentiful and it's free. You just have to step outside. So that's the recommendation that we do. Then the question is, if people do this, then what happens? So in real experiment, we actually give them few things. They use the app to take a picture. They wear continuous glucose monitors. We can see how their blood glucose is responding, because we don't want people to have their blood glucose dip so low at night that they are in danger zone. So we monitor that. And then we give them an active watch that I'm wearing, so that we can see when they're active, when they're sleeping, how much light, even red, green, and blue spectrum of light, all of that we monitor. So this is the glucose report. So now, let's take all of these and then focus only on the glucose report. So this is a person who had a BMI of 42. So that means a very big person, almost 180 kilos or 400 pounds. Had a fasting blood glucose of 130, 140, so clearly diabetic. And this is how the blood glucose fluctuated over 2 weeks period. And had a HbA1c, those of you who are familiar, had a 6.7, 5.5 is kind of the desirable zone. The person actually ate only 3 meals, mostly. Wakes up around 4:30, has a very early morning commute, so I had breakfast around 5:30, and then lunch, and dinner was done by 6:30. And what's wrong? So we asked him to do only one thing, to change the breakfast, so that he now brings the breakfast to work and has breakfast around 8:30 at night. And the dinner time didn't change, dinner is still around 7. After 12 weeks, this is what happened. The estimated A1C, which was 6.7, diabetes, came down to 5.1, which is healthy. And this person was still BMI of 40, so didn't actually lose a ton of weight. And so this is how the before and after looks like. And why we're excited, there are 86 million people in this country who have pre-diabetes. And when they go from pre-diabetes to diabetes, they are on a slippery slope, because right after that, they will have various brain disorders, or that's actually accelerated dementia. It's precursor to many kidney disease, heart disease, etc. So when a person goes from pre-diabetes to diabetes, the cost of healthcare goes up by $9,600 per year. So now, if with this thing, if we can delay diabetes in 10 million people for just 1 year, that's $96 billion in healthcare savings. It's only for diabetes. We can also think of other stuff, because in almost all of our patients, in the first pilot study just came out, we found that by eating for 10 hours, they reduce their acid reflux. There are 64 million prescriptions written in this country for acid reflux every year. And blood pressure drops somewhere between 10 to 20 millimeters, so that's equivalent to taking 1 blood pressure medication. And of course, body weight, body fat also improves. Cholesterol improves to some extent, but takes longer time. With this in mind, I also should say that we do see gender differences. Male and females respond differently. Premenopausal and postmenopausal women also respond differently. So we need more research to figure out whether combining what we call time-restricted eating with something else, maybe better nutrition or exercise, might help some people. With the public-facing app, we have thousands of people all over the world that are downloading our app and also sharing their data. So in that way, we don't have to actually do new experiments. We can just look at the shared data and mine them to come up with better recommendations. So I'd like to end with this very summary slide. So that is, when we have better rhythms, then our brain and body are in balance and we are in healthy state. And erratic lifestyle, for example, shift work or random eating or staying awake for a few nights, late in the night, can increase obesity and also increase many of these diseases. But the good news is many of these are reversible. By just combining circadian lifestyle, we can reverse many of them. So thank you, Dallas, and thank you again, the Container Store.
Wow. I know my circadian clock is broken, but I know where to get it fixed.
You're in the same group.
So, I mean, at the Salk Institute, I don't know if y'all have had a chance to be there, but what a blessing to be there because you're right at the glider fort. My wife still lives there. As you know, I'm commuting part-time, but it's a great facility. So, some questions for Dr. Panda. We're going to be a little bit tight on that because he's going to dinner afterwards, so I'll yeah, and Dr. Fratantoni is going to be here to answer more questions about this thing. So when we hit Dr. Panda with some questions, we'll have a neuroscientist to continue that discussion.
Does the type and duration of exercise make a difference? What happens in the evenings?
Yeah, so that's an active area of research. The one example that I gave about diabetes, type 2 diabetes, was high intensity interval training. That's not what most of us do. So that is being on the bike for with your maximum force for 1 minute, and then off for 1 minute doing it 10 cycles, or 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off for 4 cycles. So that was done. But having said that, there are also other experiments done which is milder form of exercise, but that was done on healthy individuals. And in those mild form of exercise, just relaxingly biking, those kind of stuff, we also see slight better reduction in blood glucose. So as I said, this is again new because we got to see these results reproduced in multiple places before make general recommendation for diabetes management.
Next question back here, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Panda. I really enjoyed your lecture and learned a lot from it. My question is, how does obstructive sleep apnea affect that circadian rhythm, and what kind of studies have y'all done with that?
Yeah, so that's again an emerging area because in obstructive sleep apnea, there are two things that are happening. One is people do have disrupted sleep. Second is when they have disrupted sleep, if they wake up and cannot go back to sleep and switch on light and try to eat, then it becomes difficult to disentangle what is the impact of OSA alone versus all these additional things that happen. Having said that, with OSA, we know that there is a hypoxic response. So the body reacts as if it's running out of oxygen. And that hypoxic response resets our circadian clock. So that also confuses the circadian clock, whether it's middle of the day or middle of the night. But again, this is an area where we cannot have an animal model because it's very hard to make mice snore. But at the same time, it's very hard to collect the kind of tissue samples and fluids that we need to collect from human patients. So this is a challenge.
Hello, Dr. Panda. Thank you so much. That was a great lecture. I was wondering, how do circadian rhythms adapt or change in a regular or extended or extreme day-night cycle, such as near the polar ice caps or on the ISS?
Yeah, so that's why there are less people living in that. We know that circadian rhythms, and particularly the impact of light on mood and depression, is most exaggerated in extreme latitudes. So in fact, if we just look at the rate of suicide, that goes up as we go away from equator to the northern latitude. And again, the cases of suicide goes up as we go from winter to springtime because we go from depression to manic phase, and the dangerous zone is when you're depressed, but you are alert enough to take action on your suicidal thought. So that's why in northern latitude, actually most of the lighting engineers and most of the lighting experiments have come from Nordic countries because they're more sensitive to this importance of this kind of research.
Yeah, I had a question that's kind of basic probably, but could you define what food and drink is for that 10-hour period? I mean, does it include alcohol? Does it include coffee? Does it include like diet soda that contains caffeine but has no food value? Anyway, that's it.
That's absolutely a very important question because even nutritionists haven't come to a consensus. What is food? So let's think about the biological basis. We know that our blood sugar should be less than 100 milligram per deciliter in the morning. That's the fasting blood sugar. So 100 milligram per deciliter, if you now drain all of my blood and figure out how much sugar I have, 5 liters of blood, 5 grams of sugar. That's a teaspoon of sugar. Okay, so in the morning, if someone, and when it goes above 120, then that's in the danger zone. So that's 6 grams of sugar in our blood. So now in the morning, suppose say you're waking up and you want to just put half a teaspoon of sugar. If our body cannot metabolize and absorb that half a teaspoon, then our blood sugar will go to 140 and stay there. So that means the body has to work to even manage that half a teaspoon of sugar. So now this might help you to understand, okay, so can I have only black coffee or half a teaspoon of sugar, or 1 teaspoon of sugar, or half and half that has a little bit of sugar. This goes only for sugar. Caffeine actually resets our circadian clock. So in that way, we can use caffeine in a productive way. So for example, in the morning, my rule of thumb is if you get up from the bed and you're still feeling sleepy and you want that coffee to stay awake, maybe you didn't get enough sleep. Pay attention to how much you're sleeping. But having said that, there are at least 3 cases where you can have black coffee in the morning. One is when your job is on the line. You are a TV anchor or a radio host or you're a security person in a nuclear power plant. Second is public safety. It's better to drive caffeinated than sleepy. 1 in 3 adults who drive in the morning are actually sleep deprived and they're driving sleepy. And then the third one is if coffee is the only love in your life that keeps you awake, go for it. So, at the same time, in the afternoon, after lunch, it's not advisable to have coffee because it will keep you awake for a long period of time. Diet soda and all these other drinks, diet soda affects our gut microbiome, although it may not affect our circadian rhythm. Now my question is to most of you, suppose say, one day I did not eat anything. I had diet soda in every 15 minutes without caffeine for the entire day. Would you consider that I was fasting? Most nutritionists also have no clear idea. So in these cases, for most of our studies, we ask them to have only energy-containing food during that 10 hours. And in some studies, if they eat or drink, say, coffee or some of the non-calorie containing, and we ask them to log. Alcohol does have calories, so that doesn't count towards fasting. Sorry, that was a long.
No, that's perfect. They're advertising these lights now that you can turn on and back, like bed light, to make you feel like you're in the sun. What do you think about that? Those things like
Yeah, I mean, those lights were actually widely used in Nordic countries. You can even go to a light spa. And right now there is much better lighting because it's really hard to simulate sunlight. And I simplified, I said just blue light, but in fact, even other colors of light, like green light or orange light, do have some interaction. So bottom line is, if we can come very close to daylight, outside light, that's the best light to have. So many of the new lighting fixtures do have those close to daylight.
Have you done any cultural studies on how different cultures eat? For example, the Argentines many times don't eat until 9 or 10 at night? Or is it just a matter of the 10 hours? When you start or when you finish doesn't really matter.
Well, so that's why when I put on that slide, I said don't pay attention to the timing, because suppose say one is consistently eating dinner at 9 at night, but is going to bed at 1 o'clock and is waking up at 8 in the morning, then he or she may be fine. But if somebody is eating until 9 o'clock and going to bed at 9:30 or 10, then he or she may be at a higher risk for sleep disruption and few other things. There are some studies done on Spaniards because they are also likely to eat late. And those studies came out showing that the Spanish people who eat after 9 p.m. 25% higher risk for prostate cancer and breast cancer than those who finish their dinner by 9. So even in those cultures, you may not see obese people walking around in Spain, but the risk for chronic disease actually is high.
One more question over here, and then we'll, a couple more over there, okay. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Dr. Panda. Thank you for that talk. My question is about chronic stress, or more specifically for people who struggle with anxiety or chronic anxiety, and as a result may experience heightened levels of cortisol in the body. How do you suggest someone go about time-restricted eating when they don't have an appetite to begin with because of, the loss of appetite that comes with anxiety or fight or flight?
That's a hard question.
I'm sorry.
But what we know about the biology of anxiety or panic disorder, there's an enzyme called CCK, it's in my book, that's produced in our upper intestine to help us digest protein and other stuff. And this hormone breaks down, and if it is broken down to not incompletely, then that makes a kind of a byproduct that's that can trigger panic attack or anxiety to such an extent that most of the drugs, anxiolytic drugs, are actually tested against this tiny peptide that is injected 50 microgram into an adult, and you'll get immediately panic attack. And then, so what we're finding is time-restricted eating kind of helps this partly broken down hormone to be fully broken down. So maybe that's one way we do see in some of our patients who are practicing 8 to 10 hours, not 10 to 12. They see slight improvement in the reduction in events when they're panicking and slight reduction in anxiety. But I haven't looked at people who are panicking and anxious so much that they have lost appetite.
So what is your opinion, because a lot of times when people are trying to relax and they can't go to sleep very easily, it has been suggested to take melatonin. What is your opinion on melatonin?
Yeah, so melatonin is a natural hormone, so that's why it's, and there are now studies showing that women who take 5 milligrams of melatonin have reduced breast cancer risk. So having said that, melatonin, just like it makes our brain to sleep, it also makes our pancreas to sleep. And so our pancreas is not that good in producing insulin. So that means now we can better manage melatonin by not taking melatonin right after our dinner, but maybe wait for an hour or two and then take melatonin just close to bedtime. So that also fits with the plan, because you have to have your dinner 2 to 3 hours before going to bed, and maybe half an hour before going to bed you can have melatonin.
We're in a medical community here, and so there's people over in the hospitals that are working 12-hour shifts in the day, then there's a whole other shift that works 12 hours at night. So what would you suggest for people that have night shifts and doing this kind of timetable, metabolical, because their schedules are completely opposite of what the schedule that you outlined?
That's a very challenging question, because the shift work, the way shifts are designed, is not based on science. It's mostly based on convenience and kind of spreading the pain equally among people, and sometimes even the shifts change within the same week, which is not ideal. What would be ideal is to, for example, in San Diego, the San Diego Police Department works on a very interesting, very easy, what I say is much better shift work, because they do 8-hour shift for 4 months, and then they rotate to the next 8-hour shift. So in that way, they get enough time to adjust, because even on the off days, they can maintain slightly some sanity by eating and sleeping around the same. It's also a touchy subject, because people who do night shift, they do get extra pay. They are the ones who actually protest to change the shift work. And this is what we are learning, because I'm working with firefighters, San Diego firefighters. And the first thing that the union said is, you make sure that your study is not going to change overtime rule or shift work rule. So this is a debate for bigger policy change.
So, I have a question. Today when we were talking, I wanted the audience to hear what you said. Is we go to the doctor and they spend 15 minutes to make ourselves well.
Yeah, so what I say is, in a year, there are 8,760 hours. And out of those 8,760 hours, if you are lucky, then your doctor will spend 1 hour with you. And actually, if your doctor is spending 1 hour with you, then you should be better, really scared, because the average doctor visit for a primary care physician in many practices is 6 minutes. That means for 8,759 hours, you are in charge of your health. It also means that if you just pay attention to do two things, one is to learn what is out there that you can practice, and second, find the opportunity to reduce it to practice, then you will be actually in much better shape, so that you don't need that 1 hour. Maybe you can go for only 6 minutes before.
Okay, 2 quick questions from next door, then we're going to have to let him get his circadian clock on going here. So, do you see a benefit to waking up with a special alarm clock that gradually increases light in a room to wake up?
Yeah, so that's how our Argentinian Tobas wake up, and that's how our ancestors used to wake up. So gradually increasing the light activates our melanopsin system, the blue light sensor, because even through closed eyelid, you know that we can still sense some light. So that's much better than alarm clock.
All right, and Dr. Fratantoni, are you gonna, we're gonna let Dr. Panda leave? So Dr. Fratantoni is gonna have a couple of things, a couple of announcements for the team. Let's have a round of applause for Dr. Panda. Thank you to the Robuck and to the Panda store tonight. Thank you very much.